A woman trapped in a smoking car, moments from exploding. A single dad dives into the flames, rips the door open, and carries her to safety. She thinks she's just met a humble small-town mechanic, but when she finds out he's secretly worth $3 billion, her heart starts to fall fast. Then, at a crowded church dinner, a little boy runs up to him and whispers the words that send the whole town into chaos. "Mommy says you're my daddy." The clip goes viral. The media swarms. The truth? Buried under rumors, lies, and a scandal that could destroy everything and everyone he loves. Can this quiet hero protect his daughter, clear his name, and hold on to the woman who believes in him before the world tears them apart? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The late autumn sun hung low in the sky as Grace Alvarez hummed along to the choir music playing in her head. Sheet music rustled in her trunk from that afternoon's practice, and she couldn't help but smile, thinking of how her students had mastered that tricky harmony section. The familiar route home from school wound through patches of fog that had settled in the valley. Brake lights suddenly flared ahead. Grace eased off the accelerator as traffic slowed to a crawl. Through the thickening fog she could make out what looked like smoke mixing with the mist. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel. The cars ahead had come to a complete stop now. Grace pressed her brake pedal firmly, but before her sedan could fully stop, a sickening crunch of metal filled her ears. The impact from behind thrust her car forward, and then everything tilted sideways as her vehicle slid into the roadside ditch. For a moment, all Grace could hear was her own rapid breathing and the tick-tick-tick of her hazard lights clicking on automatically. She tried to open her door, but it wouldn't budge. The frame had warped in the crash. "Stay calm," she whispered to herself, fighting down the surge of panic in her chest. "Just stay calm." That's when she smelled it, the sharp, unmistakable scent of gasoline. Looking through her windshield, she could see flames beginning to lick at the crumpled hood of the car ahead of her. The smoke was getting thicker. Grace pushed against her door again, harder this time, but it remained stubbornly stuck. She could hear shouts from somewhere outside and the distant wail of sirens. The heat from the burning car ahead was becoming intense enough to feel through her windshield. "Hello?" she called out, her voice trembling. "Can anyone help me?" Suddenly, a figure appeared at her window, a man in a grease-stained jacket, his face etched with concern. He yanked at her door handle, then braced himself against the frame. "Cover your face," he called through the glass, his voice steady and clear. Grace turned away, shielding her eyes with her arms. There was a screech of protesting metal, and then a rush of cool air as the door finally gave way. "Can you unbuckle?" the man asked, already reaching across her to help with the seatbelt. His hands were strong but gentle, and his eyes, a warm, steady brown, held hers for just a moment. "I think so," Grace managed, fumbling with the clasp. The smoke was getting thicker now, making her cough. "We need to move fast," he said, and before she could respond, he had scooped her up in his arms. The movement sent a spike of pain through her ribs, but Grace barely had time to register it before they were moving away from the car. They had only gone a few steps when a whoosh of heat exploded behind them. The man turned, shielding her body with his own, as her sedan's hood burst into flames. "Are you hurt?" he asked, setting her down carefully on the grass by the roadside. His voice was kind, concerned. Grace shook her head, though everything felt distant and unreal. "I don't think so. Just shaken. You saved my life." She looked up to thank him properly, but he was already straightening up, glancing over his shoulder at the approaching sirens and the gathering crowd with their phones held high. "The paramedics will take good care of you," he said, already backing away. "Stay safe, ma'am." "Wait." Grace called, but he was gone, disappearing into the crowd just as the emergency vehicles arrived with their lights flashing through the smoke and fog. Everything after that became a blur of activity. Paramedics checked her vitals, while firefighters doused the burning vehicles. Someone wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and helped her onto a stretcher, despite her protests that she could walk. You should still get checked out at the hospital, the EMT insisted. You might have injuries you can't feel yet. In the emergency room, a kind-faced nurse took her vital signs while Grace tried to describe what had happened. He just appeared out of nowhere, she said, still feeling dazed, like an angel in a work jacket. If he hadn't been there. Sounds like you had a guardian angel looking out for you today, the nurse agreed, patting her hand. Later that night, alone in her hospital room, Grace lay awake listening to the quiet beeping of monitors in the hallway. Her body ached, but the doctors had assured her nothing was broken, just bruising and mild whiplash that would heal with time. She couldn't stop thinking about those steady brown eyes, the gentle strength in his hands as he'd carried her to safety. He hadn't even told her his name. The memory of his face was already starting to blur at the edges, but she remembered how safe she'd felt in those few crucial moments. "I'm going to find you," she whispered into the darkness of her hospital room. "I don't know who you are yet, but I'm going to find you and thank you properly." The morning sun streamed through the hospital window as Grace gathered her belongings. Her body felt stiff, but the doctors had cleared her to go home. A young police officer had stopped by earlier with paperwork about the accident. "The man who pulled you out?" The officer had checked his notes. "That would be Jonah Reed, owns Riverbend Auto over on Mason Street. Good guy, fixes half the teachers' cars in town at cost." Now, standing in her kitchen, Grace measured flour into a mixing bowl. Her mother had always said a proper thank you required something homemade. The recipe for apple pie was worn and splattered, but she knew it by heart. "Add extra cinnamon," she murmured to herself, the familiar motions of baking helping to settle her nerves. Her hands trembled slightly as she rolled out the dough, but she focused on making the crimped edges perfect. By early afternoon, a golden brown pie sat cooling on her counter. Grace changed into a fresh blouse, wincing slightly at the bruises on her arms, then carefully lifted the still-warm pie into a carrier. Riverbend Auto wasn't hard to find. The single-story brick building had weathered signs and clean windows. 3 service bays stood open to the autumn air, and the sound of tools and good-natured conversation drifted out. Grace parked her borrowed car and took a deep breath before stepping out. A bell chimed as she pushed open the office door. "Be right with you," called a cheerful voice from the back. Before anyone appeared, a young girl poked her head around the corner. She looked about 10, with bright eyes and 2 neat braids. "Are you here to get your car fixed?" "Actually, I'm looking for Jonah Reed," Grace said, smiling at the child. "I brought him something." The girl's face lit up. "That's my dad. I can get him." She turned and called out, "Dad, someone's here to see you." A moment later, Jonah emerged from one of the service bays, wiping his hands on a shop rag. He wore the same work jacket she remembered from yesterday, and his expression shifted from professional to surprised when he recognized her. "Ms. Alvarez," he said, "should you be up and around so soon?" "Grace, please," she corrected gently, "and I'm fine, thanks to you." She held up the pie carrier. "I wanted to thank you properly for saving my life yesterday." A slight flush colored his cheeks. "That's really not necessary. I just did what anyone would do." "Not everyone would run toward a burning car," Grace countered. "Please accept this. It's apple, made from scratch." The young girl bounced on her toes. "Dad loves apple pie. I'm Lily, by the way. It's nice to meet you, Lily," Grace said warmly. "I'm Grace. I teach music at the elementary school." "Really?" Lily's eyes widened. "I love music. Want to see something special?" Before waiting for an answer, Lily darted behind the counter and pulled out a wooden box. It was lovingly decorated with painted flowers and carefully lettered words. "Letters to God. I keep it here so people can write prayers or thank you notes," Lily explained proudly. "Pastor Ruth lets me put them on the prayer board at church every Sunday." "That's beautiful," Grace said, genuinely touched by the child's thoughtfulness. "Lily has a bigger heart than most grown-ups I know," Jonah said softly, watching his daughter with evident pride. A loud clang from one of the service bays made them all jump. A mechanic in coveralls stuck his head through the doorway, grinning when he saw the pie carrier. "Well, well," he called out. "Looks like the boss finally met someone who can cook. About time, too. Man can rebuild an engine blindfolded but burns water. Thanks for that, Mike," Jonah said dryly, but his eyes crinkled with good humor. "Hey, just telling it like it is," Mike laughed, disappearing back into the bay. "I should let you get back to work," Grace said, setting the pie on the counter. "But truly, thank you again. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been there." "I'm just glad I could help," Jonah replied. His voice was quiet but sincere. "Can you come see us again?" Lily asked hopefully. "Maybe you could write something for the letters box?" "I'd like that," Grace found herself saying. "If it's okay with your dad." Jonah nodded. "You're welcome, anytime." Walking back to her car, Grace glanced over her shoulder. Through the office window, she could see Jonah and Lily together, heads bent over the pie as Lily gestured animatedly about something. Jonah's laugh was visible even from a distance, transforming his whole face. Grace felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. There was something about that father-daughter pair that made her want to know more about their story, their lives, and especially about the quiet hero who'd saved her life and then tried to slip away without recognition. The church basement hummed with conversation as people gathered for the monthly potluck. Grace set her green bean casserole on the crowded table and noticed a cluster of older ladies near the coffee station, their voices carrying across the room. "And the organ repair bill just disappeared," Mrs. Thompson was saying, stirring sugar into her cup. "Pastor Ruth says someone paid it in full but won't say who. Same thing happened with the 5th grade field trip fund," added Mrs. Chen, the school secretary. "All those kids who couldn't afford it suddenly had their fees covered. No name, just an envelope of cash in the office. You know who I think it is?" Mrs. Thompson leaned in closer. "That quiet car guy, Reed. The one who fixes everyone's vehicles at discount. My grandson swears he saw him leaving the school office that day." Grace's ears perked up. She busied herself arranging napkins nearby, listening intently. But how could a mechanic afford all that? Mrs. Chen wondered. "Maybe there's more to him than meets the eye," Mrs. Thompson replied with a knowing look. Later that afternoon, Grace found herself in the choir room, straightening music sheets. A crumpled receipt caught her eye, partially hidden behind the piano. She picked it up, meaning to throw it away, but the amount made her pause. $12,500 for organ restoration services. The payment notation simply read, "Cash." The handwriting on the receipt looked familiar. She'd seen it before, on the work order at Riverbend Auto. Over the next few days, Grace noticed more signs. Fresh flowers appeared weekly at the community center, always paid in cash, always with gift cards in the same distinctive handwriting, "For those who need a bit of beauty today." Her curiosity, growing, Grace drove out to the lake house address she'd overheard mentioned at the garage. The property was impressive but not showy, a well-maintained craftsman home overlooking the water. As she pulled up, a woman in practical work clothes was leaving through the side door. "Can I help you?" the woman asked, her tone professional but cautious. "I'm looking for information about Jonah Reed," Grace said honestly. "I'm Grace Alvarez, the music teacher at, the one he pulled from the car." The woman's expression softened slightly. "I'm Maria Santos. I keep house here, though Mr. Reed hardly uses the place except for storage." Grace hesitated, then asked, "What kind of person is he, really?" "I keep hearing stories." Maria's dark eyes studied her for a moment. "Come sit," she finally said, gesturing to a garden bench. "I'll tell you about my son Mateo's asthma attack last winter." She described a terrifying night in the emergency room, insurance refusing to cover the treatment. "I was crying at my cleaning cart the next day, trying to figure out how to pay the bills," Mr. Reed overheard. That afternoon, the hospital called. Everything had been paid in full. He never mentioned it, just asked how Mateo was feeling when he saw us next. He seems to help a lot of people quietly, Grace observed. Maria nodded. He treats everyone the same, me, the mechanics, fancy business people who sometimes visit. But he's careful, private. Especially about Lily. Grace thanked Maria and drove straight to Riverbend Auto. The service bays were quiet. It was nearly closing time. She found Jonah in his office, going over paperwork. "I think we need to talk," she said gently. He looked up, something flickering in his eyes. "About?" "About why a mechanic can afford to repair church organs and pay medical bills." She held up the crumpled receipt. "This is your handwriting." Jonah was silent for a long moment, staring at his hands. Finally he stood and closed the office door. "What I'm about to tell you, I keep it quiet for Lily's sake." He ran a hand through his hair. "Before moving here, I built a cybersecurity company. Sold it 8 years ago. The amount was substantial." "How substantial?" "Around $3 billion. He said it simply, without pride. "My wife had just died. I wanted Lily to have a normal childhood, not," he gestured vaguely, "all that comes with that kind of money and attention." "So you chose to live simply and help people in secret?" Grace finished softly. "Money's just a tool. What matters is how you use it." He met her eyes. "Please keep this between us. For Lily." Grace nodded, understanding flowing through her. This explained so much: his modesty, his quiet generosity, his protective instincts toward his daughter. That night, sitting at her desk, Grace opened her journal and began to write. "I thought I was just curious about the mysterious donor, trying to solve a puzzle. But watching Jonah today, the way he tried to minimize his actions, how his first thought was protecting Lily, the genuine care in his voice when he talked about helping others, I realize I'm falling for him, not because of what he has, but because of who he is. A man who could live anywhere, do anything, be anyone, and he chooses to fix cars, raise his daughter with solid values, and help people without wanting credit. That kind of humility is rare. That kind of heart is even rarer." The autumn evening wrapped around St. Mark's Church like a cozy blanket, carrying the aroma of competing chili recipes through its open doors. Inside the parish hall, long tables groaned under the weight of crockpots, each labeled with handwritten cards bearing proud cooks' names and creative titles like Heaven's Heat and Angel's Revenge. Children darted between tables, paper bowls clutched in their hands, while parents called out half-hearted warnings about running. Fairy lights strung across the ceiling cast a warm glow over the bustling scene, and laughter mixed with the clinking of spoons against bowls. Grace stood behind her entry, music teacher's melody maker, ladling out portions with a smile. She'd added just enough spice to make it interesting without overwhelming anyone's taste buds. Her eyes kept drifting to the entrance, watching for a certain mechanic and his daughter. When Jonah finally arrived with Lily, Grace's heart did a little skip. He wore a clean flannel shirt instead of his usual work clothes, and Lily had ribbons in her hair. They made their way through the crowd, stopping to greet people with easy familiarity. Behind them came Maria Santos, looking elegant in a simple navy dress, holding little Mateo's hand. The boy bounced with excitement, his new sneakers lighting up with each step. Grace noticed how Jonah made sure to include them, gestured them toward the table he'd spotted near the window. "You have to try Miss Grace's chili," Lily was telling Mateo, taking charge like a big sister. "It's not too spicy, I promise." Grace and Jonah's eyes met across the room, and something warm passed between them. He gave her a small smile, one that seemed meant just for her, and she felt her cheeks flush. The evening progressed pleasantly. People moved between tables, comparing recipes and sharing news. Pastor Ruth made her rounds, praising every entry with diplomatic enthusiasm. Grace managed to take a break from serving and joined Jonah's table, where Lily was explaining the proper way to combine cornbread with chili to get maximum yumminess. "The secret is making a little wall with the cornbread," Lily demonstrated seriously, "so the chili doesn't escape." Very engineering-minded, Grace commented, and Jonah chuckled. Wonder where she gets that from, he said softly. Maria was telling them about her grandmother's secret chili recipe when Mateo, who had been coloring quietly, suddenly perked up. He slid off his chair and darted around the table to where Jonah sat. "Mr. Jonah," he called out, tugging on Jonah's sleeve. The man turned, smiling down at the little boy. "What's up, buddy?" Mateo stretched up on his tiptoes, cupping his small hands around his mouth in what he probably thought was a whisper, but came out clearly audible. "Mommy says you're my daddy." The words seemed to hang in the air. Maria's face drained of color. "Mateo, no, that's not." But the damage was done. A few feet away, a woman in a bright blouse lowered her phone, her eyes gleaming with the look of someone who'd just struck gold. Grace recognized her as the local woman who ran a gossip vlog about town happenings. "Mateo, come here," Maria said sharply, her voice trembling. She grabbed her son's hand and quickly led him away from the table, leaving his crayons scattered across the surface. Jonah half rose, concern etched on his face, but Grace touched his arm. "Let me," she said quietly, and followed Maria. She found them in the church's small library, Maria pacing, while Mateo sat in a beanbag chair, looking confused and close to tears. "I never told him that," Maria said as soon as Grace entered. Her hands were shaking. "Never. I would never." She took a deep breath. "Once, when Jonah helped with Mateo's medical bills, I told my son that Mr. Jonah takes care of us like a dad would. That's all." "He must have." She pressed her hands to her face. "Of course you wouldn't," Grace assured her. "Everyone knows that. We'll explain." "You don't understand," Maria cut in. "That woman with the phone, she makes everything into scandal. And people already talk because I clean his house. They'll twist this. Make it dirty." Her voice cracked. "I could lose my other cleaning clients. People will think." Grace stepped forward and hugged her, feeling Maria's shoulders shake with suppressed sobs. "We won't let that happen," she promised, though she wasn't sure how to prevent it. Mateo looked up at them with wide eyes. "Did I say something bad?" "No, mi amor." Maria knelt beside him. "You just misunderstood something," Mommy said. "Mr. Jonah is our friend, but he's not your daddy." Within hours, the damage spread like wildfire. The clip appeared on the local gossip vlog, edited to show just Mateo's confession and Jonah's stunned face, with the inflammatory caption, "Maid's son calls billionaire daddy." The comments section filled with crude speculation and thinly veiled racist remarks. Grace tried calling Jonah that night but got no answer. She tossed and turned, worried about them all, Jonah, Lily, Maria, Mateo. How quickly a beautiful evening had shattered. When her phone buzzed early Sunday morning, she grabbed it hopefully, but it wasn't Jonah. Instead, a text from her fellow teacher Jennifer lit up the screen. "Your heroes all over the internet." Grace rushed to her window and pulled back the curtain. Through the early morning mist, she could make out the shapes of news vans parked along the street in front of St. Mark's, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like hungry fingers. The simple acts of kindness and connection they'd all been building, the easy friendship between Lily and Mateo, the trust between Jonah and Maria, the blooming possibility between Grace and Jonah, now felt fragile, threatened by the harsh glare of public scrutiny and assumption, all because of a child's innocent misunderstanding and a stranger's hunger for clicks and views. The morning sun filtered through St. Mark's stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across empty pews. The last notes of the closing hymn had faded 15 minutes ago, but most of the congregation lingered in the parking lot, drawn by the spectacle of news vans and reporters. Jonah stood at a side window, his jaw tight as he watched another camera crew set up. "We'll go out through the kitchen," he said quietly to Grace and Lily. "Pastor Ruth's keeping them busy with a statement about respecting privacy." Grace squeezed Lily's hand. The girl had been unusually quiet during the service, shrinking closer to her father whenever someone stared too long. Now she clutched her letters to God box against her chest like a shield. They slipped through the kitchen, past stacked coffee urns and leftover donut boxes. The back door opened onto a narrow alley between the church and the parish hall. Jonah's truck waited there, strategically parked before sunrise. "Quick now," Jonah murmured, helping Lily into the back seat. Grace had barely closed her door when Maria burst through the kitchen door, her face streaked with tears. "They're at my apartment," she gasped. "Reporters, cameras. They frightened Mateo so badly he had an asthma attack. Mrs. Peterson next door let us in through her back door, but they're watching the building." Jonah's expression hardened. "Get in. You're both staying at the lake house until this dies down. I can't impose, Maria." Jonah's voice was gentle but firm. "This isn't charity. This is keeping families safe." Grace watched Maria's resistance crumble. She climbed in beside Lily, who immediately opened her box and pulled out a tissue for Maria. They drove through back streets to Maria's apartment. Jonah parked in the alley while Grace helped Maria and Mateo pack some essentials. The boy was still wheezing slightly, clutching his inhaler. When they returned to the truck, a sleek silver Mercedes had pulled up behind them. A man in an expensive suit stepped out, his smile as polished as his shoes. "Jonah, old friend," he called out. "I thought I'd find you here." Jonah's shoulders tensed. "Carter." Grace recognized the name. Carter Hale, Jonah's former business partner. He approached with the smooth confidence of someone used to getting his way. "This is quite a situation you've got here," Carter said, glancing at Maria and Mateo in the truck. "But don't worry, I can handle it, for old time's sake." "Handle it how?" Jonah's voice was cold. "Oh, you know the drill. Strategic denial, carefully worded statement about supporting local families, maybe a small settlement with a non-disclosure agreement." Carter lowered his voice. "Better than letting people speculate about why you've been so generous with your housekeeper." Grace saw Maria flinch at the insinuation. Jonah took a step forward, his hands clenched. "Get out of here, Carter. Don't be hasty. Remember the Palmer acquisition? I made that scandal disappear like magic. This would be even easier. Just write a check and, I said, get out." Jonah's quiet tone carried more force than a shout. "There's nothing to handle because there's nothing to hide. Maria and Mateo are family friends, not a problem to solve." Carter's smile turned sharp. "Always the noble one, aren't you? Well, when this gets ugly, and it will, don't say I didn't offer to help." He got back in his Mercedes and drove away, but his words left a chill in the alley. Jonah pulled out his phone and dialed a number. "Ava, it's Jonah Reed. Remember that pro bono program we discussed for the foundation? I need your help." He listened for a moment. "Yes. It's about the viral video, but it's bigger than that. It's about dignity and pushing back against prejudice. How soon can you meet?" Grace couldn't hear the response, but Jonah's face relaxed slightly. "Thank you. The lake house in an hour? Perfect." They drove through town, taking the long way to avoid the media. The lake house sat on a wooded lot, its gates offering blessed privacy. Inside, the rooms were airy and bright, with views of water through every window. "The blue room is ready," Jonah told Maria. "It has an adjoining bedroom perfect for Mateo. Grace, would you mind helping them settle in? I need to prepare some documents for Ava." Grace helped Maria unpack while Lily showed Mateo his new room. The boy's eyes grew wide at the window seat overlooking the lake. "Look, Mommy, ducks." A family of ducks paddled past, creating gentle ripples in the late morning light. Maria managed a small smile, but Grace could see how hard she was working to stay strong for her son. Later that evening, after Ava Cho's visit had laid out their legal strategy, Grace paused in the hallway. She heard Maria's voice floating from Mateo's room, soft and steady in the darkness. "Everything will be okay, mi amor," she whispered. "We have good friends, strong friends. Sleep now, and tomorrow will be better." Grace walked quietly past, leaving mother and son to their private moment of peace. Through the window at the end of the hall, the lake reflected the rising moon, its surface untroubled by the storm brewing in town. The old church basement hummed with nervous energy as people filed in, filling metal folding chairs arranged in a circle. Evening light filtered through ground-level windows, casting long shadows across familiar faces made strange by tension. Pastor Ruth stood at the center, her silver hair gleaming under fluorescent lights. She wore her usual cardigan and sensible shoes, but her bearing commanded attention as she raised her hands for quiet. "Welcome, friends," she said, her voice carrying to every corner. "We're here tonight because our community is hurting. Rumors and prejudice have crept in like weeds, threatening to choke out the garden of fellowship we've tended together for generations." Grace sat between Jonah and Maria, watching faces around the circle. Some wouldn't meet their eyes. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few journalists sat near the back, notepads ready. "Before we begin," Pastor Ruth continued, "I want us to remember that every person in this room is a child of God, worthy of dignity and respect." Now, Maria Santos has asked to speak first. Maria stood slowly, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands. Mateo sat in Lily's lap across the circle, both children watching intently as Maria walked to the center. "I've cleaned houses in Riverbend for 12 years. She began, her voice soft but clear. "I'm proud of my work. It supports my son and helped put my sister through nursing school. But lately, I've heard people call me the maid, as if that's all I am, as if I don't have a name." She took a deep breath. "About the video that's caused so much talk, one day, when Mateo was sick and we couldn't afford his medicine, Mr. Reed helped us. Later I told my son, Mr. Jonah takes care of us like a dad would. That's all." A child's innocent words have been twisted into something ugly. Several people shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Henderson, who'd shared the video on Facebook, stared at her hands. "I'm not here asking for sympathy," Maria continued. "I'm asking for respect. Not just for me, but for everyone who works hard to make this town run. The cashiers you barely look at, the janitors you pass without speaking. We all have names, we all have stories. We all belong here." When Maria finished, silence filled the room. Then old Mr. Peterson, who owned the hardware store, stood up. "Maria," he said gruffly, "I want to apologize. I've known you for years, but I never bothered to learn your son's name. That's not right." "I'm sorry." More apologies followed, halting at first, then flowing more freely. Lily stood up, clutching her decorated box. "I brought my letters to God box," she announced. "But tonight, maybe we could write letters to people we've hurt without knowing. Pastor Ruth helped me make paper hearts for everyone." She and Mateo handed out red paper hearts. People began writing, some wiping tears as they worked. Grace watched Mrs. Henderson write a full page, then walk over to Maria. "I'm so ashamed of sharing that video," she whispered. "Can you forgive me?" Maria hugged her, and something in the room's atmosphere shifted. Pastor Ruth let the moment settle before speaking again. "Grace has asked to share something with us." "Grace?" Grace walked to the old upright piano in the corner. Her fingers found the keys, and the opening notes of "Amazing Grace" filled the room, but with a melody she'd adapted, weaving in snippets of Spanish hymns she'd learned from Maria. Her voice rose clear and strong. "Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost. But now am found, was blind, but now I see." She shifted seamlessly into Amor de Dios, then back to English. Other voices joined in, first Maria's rich alto, then others, creating an impromptu choir of reconciliation. By the final verse, half the congregation was crying openly. When the last note faded, Pastor Ruth didn't speak immediately. She let the silence hold them all, a shared moment of grace. People lingered afterward in the fellowship hall, sharing coffee and conversation. The journalists had put away their notepads, caught up in the evening's spirit of healing. Grace saw Maria introducing Matteo to people who'd never known his name before. Jonah touched her elbow gently. In the warm glow of the overhead lights, his eyes held a mixture of gratitude and something deeper. "Thank you," he said simply, "for the song, for everything." The fellowship hall lights reflected in his eyes, making them shine with unshed tears, and Grace felt her heart swell with emotion. The rhythmic ping of metal on metal echoed through Riverbend Auto's garage as Jonah worked on Grace's car. The clock on the wall showed just past 10 p.m., but neither seemed to notice the late hour. A single work light cast their shadows long against the concrete floor. Grace sat on a worn wooden stool, watching as Jonah carefully hammered out the dented fender from her accident. His movements were precise, almost gentle, as if the car was something precious. "You don't have to do this tonight," Grace said, wrapping her cardigan tighter against the autumn chill that crept through the open garage door. "I want to," Jonah replied, pausing to wipe his forehead with his sleeve. "Besides, it's peaceful here at night. No phones ringing, no reporters lurking." Grace nodded, understanding. The media frenzy hadn't died down since the video of Matteo went viral. "It's your sanctuary." "Yeah." Jonah set down his tools and pulled up another stool. "Sarah, my wife, used to tease me about spending more time with engines than people." His voice softened at the memory. "She understood, though. Said everyone needs a place to think." Grace's heart quickened at this rare mention of his wife. "How long has it been?" she asked gently. 5 years in March." Jonah's hands, still smudged with grease, clasped together. "Cancer. We thought we caught it early, but—" He shook his head. Lily was only 5. The silence stretched between them, filled with shared understanding. "Tom, my husband, it was so sudden," Grace found herself saying. "One day he was fine, teaching his high school history class, and the next." She took a shaky breath. "Brain aneurysm. The doctors said he probably never felt pain." "That's what they tell us, isn't it?" Jonah's voice was soft. "To make it easier. Does it ever get easier?" "Not easier. Different." Jonah stood and walked to a corner of the garage. "Some days the memories hurt less. Some days they're all that keeps you going," he returned with something wrapped in an old blanket. "Speaking of memories, I've been meaning to give you this." Grace unwrapped the bundle to reveal a weather-worn guitar. The wood was scratched but well cared for, with a warm patina that only came from years of use. "This belonged to Jimmy Blue Note Watson," Jonah explained. "Back before I sold my company, I used to do pro bono cybersecurity work for musicians who'd been scammed. Jimmy was one of them. Someone had stolen his identity, drained his retirement fund. We got it sorted out, but he insisted on giving me this guitar, said it had stories to tell." Grace ran her fingers over the strings. They rang true, despite the guitar's age. "It's beautiful. Jimmy passed away last year. I've been holding on to this, waiting for the right person." Jonah smiled. "When I heard you sing at the forum, I knew." Grace strummed a quiet chord, letting it resonate through the garage. Without thinking, she began humming a melody that had been forming in her mind since the forum. "That's pretty," Jonah said. "Something new?" "Maybe." Grace played another chord. "I've been thinking about writing something for the choir, about mercy, and how it flows like a river, washing away hurt, making things new." "River of mercy," Jonah mused. "I'd like to hear that." Grace continued playing softly, words beginning to form. "Like a river flowing down through the heart of this old town, mercy calls us. Mercy finds us, washes all our sorrows down." She stopped, suddenly self-conscious. "It's not finished yet." "It will be," Jonah said with quiet confidence. He turned back to her car, running his hand along the smoothed metal. "There. Good as new. Well, almost. Sometimes the marks stay, but they become part of the story." Grace understood he wasn't just talking about the car. Later, driving home with Jimmy Watson's guitar secured in her passenger seat, Grace felt something stirring in her chest. It wasn't the sharp ache of grief that had been her constant companion since Tom's death. It was lighter, warmer, like sunshine breaking through clouds. Hope, she realized. After all this time she was feeling hope. The guitar's silhouette in the darkness beside her seemed to hum with possibility, ready for new songs to be born. The lobby of the restored Riverbend Arts Center hummed with excitement. Crystal chandeliers, newly cleaned and rewired, cast a warm glow over the gathering crowd. Parents herded children in concert attire, choir members adjusted their robes, and community members filed in clutching programs. Grace stood in the wings, watching through a gap in the curtain as the auditorium filled. Her hands fidgeted with the sheet music for "River of Mercy," though she knew every note by heart. The song had poured out of her in the weeks since that night in Jonah's garage, like a message she'd been meant to deliver. Behind her, the combined choir, faces of every age and background from Riverbend, warmed up in hushed voices. The school band unpacked instruments, their teenage energy barely contained. Maria Santos stood apart, reviewing her poem one last time, while Mateo colored quietly in a corner. Nervous? Grace turned to find Jonah beside her, Lily at his side. His presence steadied her, as it had since the day of the accident. A little, she admitted, but good nervous, ready nervous. Lily tugged at her father's sleeve. "Can I sit in the front row?" "Of course, sweetheart." Jonah squeezed Grace's hand. "Break a leg." As he led Lily away, Pastor Ruth approached with her familiar, knowing smile. "Full house out there. Seems like the whole town showed up." "And half the media," Grace said, noting the news cameras set up in the back. "Let them watch," Pastor Ruth said firmly. "Some stories need telling." The house lights dimmed. Grace took her place at the conductor's podium as the curtain rose. The sight of all those faces, neighbors, students, friends, made her heart swell. She raised her hands. The first notes of "River of Mercy" rose from the band. Then the choir's voices joined in harmony. Like a river flowing down through the heart of this old town, mercy calls us. Mercy finds us, washes all our sorrows down. The melody soared, carrying hope and healing in its current. Grace caught glimpses of tears being wiped away, hands reaching for hands. When the final note faded, the applause was thunderous. Maria stepped forward next, her head high. Her voice, usually quiet, rang clear as she read, "My name means sea of strength, not maid, not help. Not words that shrink me small. I am mother, worker, dreamer. My dignity flows from with my like the river that names this town. I carry stories in my hand and pride in my son's smile." More applause, genuine and warm. Mateo ran out from the wings then, straight to Jonah in the front row. He thrust forward a piece of paper, one of his crayon drawings. Grace could see the careful letters at the top. Community Dad. Jonah knelt to hug him, then stood and walked to the microphone. His voice was steady, though Grace could see the emotion in his eyes. "Many of you know me as the guy who fixes your cars. Some of you recently learned I once built a company worth billions. But neither of those things defines who I am." He paused. "I'm Lily's father. I'm a neighbor to Maria and Mateo, family by choice. And I believe in this town." He unfolded a paper from his pocket. "Tonight, I'm announcing the creation of the Riverbend Trust. $25 million, managed by a diverse local board to fund childcare, healthcare, small business support, and other community needs. Not because I'm a billionaire, but because I'm a member of this community, because every family deserves dignity, every child deserves care, every dream deserves a chance." The audience erupted. Grace saw Maria press her hands to her mouth, tears streaming. Lily bounced in her seat, beaming. All around, people were standing, cheering, embracing. Grace slipped backstage, overwhelmed by the moment. Footsteps behind her made her turn. Jonah stood there, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "That was beautiful," he said. "Your song, it said everything." Grace stepped closer. "So did you." Their eyes met, and suddenly the space between them vanished. His kiss was gentle, full of promise. The applause still thundered beyond the curtain, but here, in this moment, there was only them. Later, they stood under the marquee lights as the crowd dispersed. Stars peeked through breaks in the clouds, and the autumn air held a hint of wood smoke. "Maybe this is the start of something," Jonah said softly. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen blinds, casting zebra stripes across Jonah's untouched coffee. His phone buzzed again, another news alert. He didn't need to look. The headlines had been screaming since dawn: billionaire's secret children, tech mogul's fertility clinic scandal, how many Reed heirs exist. Grace's voice message from an hour ago still played in his mind. "Jonah, have you seen the news? Call me." He stared at the documents Carter had leaked to every major outlet. The fertility clinic paperwork was real, dated 8 years ago, bearing what appeared to be Jonah's signature and driver's license number. But Jonah had never set foot in that clinic. The signature, though similar, wasn't his. His brother. It had to be Thomas. Before the drugs, before the overdose, when he'd been desperate for money. Jonah closed his eyes, remembering how often he'd covered for his younger brother's schemes. But this, using his identity at a fertility clinic, was beyond anything he'd imagined. The doorbell rang, its chime echoing through the quiet house. Through the security camera feed on his phone, Jonah saw 2 women in business attire standing on his porch. His stomach clenched as he recognized the Child Protective Services badges. "Mr. Reed?" The older woman introduced herself as Sandra Whitman, her younger colleague as Tracy Martinez. "We're here following up on a concern about your daughter's welfare." "An anonymous tip," Tracy added, consulting her tablet. Jonah led them to the living room, where Lily's artwork covered one wall and her backpack lay beside her favorite reading chair. Everything normal. Everything as it should be. The caller expressed concern about potential half-siblings and family instability, Sandra said carefully, given the media attention. "My daughter is well cared for," Jonah said, keeping his voice steady. "She's loved. She's safe." They asked to speak with Lily, who was upstairs doing homework. Jonah called her down, his heart aching at her confused expression when she saw the strangers. "Hi, Lily." Sandra smiled warmly. "We'd just like to chat with you for a few minutes. Is that okay?" Lily looked at her father, who nodded encouragingly. "It's all right, sweetheart." The questions were gentle but thorough. Yes, she had her own room. Yes, she ate 3 meals a day. Yes, her dad helped with homework and came to school events. No, she'd never felt unsafe. But then Tracy asked, "How do you feel about possibly having other brothers or sisters?" Lily's lower lip trembled. "I don't want other brothers or sisters. I want it to be just me and Dad." She turned to Jonah, her eyes filling with tears. "Am I not enough?" "Oh, baby." Jonah moved to hold her, but Sandra raised a hand, indicating they needed to finish their questions first. He sat back, his hands clenched in his lap. After what felt like hours, the CPS workers left, promising to file their report promptly. Jonah knew they'd found nothing concerning. His home was safe. Lily was clearly well adjusted and cared for. But the visit itself felt like a violation. His phone rang, the trust's lawyer. "The judge granted a temporary injunction," she said without preamble. "The trust funds are frozen pending investigation into potential heirs and liability issues." Jonah thanked her mechanically and hung up. Another call came immediately. The school superintendent. "We value Grace tremendously," the woman said, her tone apologetic but firm. "But given the sensitive nature of these allegations, and her connection to the situation, we feel it's best she take paid leave until the dust settles." By noon, Grace arrived at his door, her face drawn. "They're saying I knew, that I was covering up your secret families." She sank onto the couch. The superintendent suggested I lay low for a while. Jonah wanted to comfort her, but Lily's soft crying drifted down from upstairs. The sound pierced him like physical pain. "Go to her," Grace said softly. "She needs you more right now." But Lily had locked her bedroom door. Please, sweetie, Jonah called through the wood. Let me explain. Are you going to find your other kids? Lily's voice was muffled by tears. Will you love them more than me? There are no other kids, Lily. You're my only child. My whole heart. But the news said, the news is wrong. Someone is trying to hurt us by telling lies. Jonah rested his forehead against the door. You are enough. You've always been enough, the crying continued. Grace touched his shoulder. Give her time. I should go. Being seen here right now probably won't help either of us. Jonah watched her leave, feeling powerless to fix any of this. His phone buzzed with Carter's number. He declined the call. In the kitchen, he sat alone at the table, surrounded by the remnants of their normal morning, Lily's half-eaten toast, her juice glass with lip gloss marks on the rim, her math worksheet covered in careful numbers. Through the ceiling, he could still hear her crying, softer now but steady, like rain. The morning air was crisp as Jonah walked into Annie's coffee shop. The bell above the door chimed softly, and a few early customers glanced up before quickly looking away. He'd gotten used to that, the subtle recognition, followed by studied indifference. Pastor Ruth sat in her usual corner booth, 2 steaming mugs already on the table. She wore her familiar denim jacket, a wooden cross hanging from a leather cord around her neck. Her silver hair caught the morning light from the window. I ordered your usual, she said as he slid into the booth. Black coffee, no fuss. Thank you. Jonah wrapped his hands around the warm mug but didn't drink. How's Lily this morning? She went to school. Wouldn't talk to me at breakfast. He stared into the dark coffee. I've never felt so helpless, Ruth. Not even when Sarah was sick. Ruth nodded, letting the silence stretch comfortably. That was her way, creating space for people to find their words. The media's painting me as some kind of, he shook his head, and now they're dragging Grace into it. The school put her on leave. The trust is frozen. Everything good we were building, his voice caught. Jonah Reed, Pastor Ruth said firmly. Look at me. He met her steady gaze. Confession isn't condemnation. She took a sip of her tea. Tell me what you know about these clinic documents. It was Thomas. Had to be. The words came easier now. My brother used my ID sometimes when he was struggling, before he died. I covered for him more times than I can count. But this? He ran a hand through his hair. I never imagined he'd go this far. Have you told anyone else? Just Grace. And now you. He finally took a sip of coffee. If I go public about Thomas, it feels like betraying him all over again. He's not here to defend himself. And if you stay silent? Then everyone believes I'm hiding secret children, that I abandoned them, that I'm the kind of man he couldn't finish. A young mother walked past their booth, pulling her child closer as she recognized him. The little boy waved anyway. Jonah managed a small wave back. You know what I see? Ruth asked, watching the interaction. I see a father who's spent years protecting everyone else. Your brother's memory, Lily's privacy, Maria's dignity, the town's needs. Maybe it's time to protect the truth itself. By exposing Thomas? By being honest about who you are. Ruth reached across the table and squeezed his hand. The truth isn't always comfortable, but it's always holy. The bell chimed again, and Ava Cho walked in, her briefcase tucked under one arm. She spotted them and made her way over. I hoped I'd find you here, she said, sliding into the booth next to Ruth. I've been calling. Phone's off, Jonah admitted. Needed some quiet. Well, I have a proposal. Ava pulled out some papers. We can request expedited DNA testing. Clear your name scientifically. I've already located the clinic's records. They kept genetic samples from all donations. We can prove definitively that you were never a donor there. How long would that take? Jonah asked. Rush results? 3 to 5 days. Ava spread the forms on the table. It's worth the wait. Truth backed by science is harder to dispute than any statement we could make. Pastor Ruth nodded. The town can handle a few more days of gossip if it means getting to the whole truth. Jonah studied the papers. "And this would prove that you have no biological children except Lily," Ava confirmed. "We can put out a statement about Thomas once we have the results. Frame it compassionately. Your brother was sick, made mistakes. You protected his privacy. People will understand that better than they understand silence." The coffee shop was filling up now. More sideways glances, more whispers. A teenager snapped a photo with her phone. "Okay," Jonah said quietly. "Let's do it." Ava pulled out a pen. "I'll file these today. Have the samples collected this afternoon." "I'll call Grace," Ruth added. "She should know what's coming." After signing the forms, Jonah stood to leave. But Ruth caught his arm. "Come to the evening prayer service," she said. "Bring Lily. Maria and Mateo will be there. Sometimes the best medicine for a hurting family is to pray together." That evening, the small chapel glowed with candlelight. Lily sat between Jonah and Mateo, her hand clasped in the younger boy's. Maria sat on Mateo's other side, her face peaceful in the soft light. Pastor Ruth's voice carried through the quiet space. "Let us pray for truth to light our way, for patience as we wait, for love to bind us together." Jonah felt Lily lean against him. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "For families of blood," Ruth continued, "and families of choice, for hearts that grow big enough to hold all the love God sends our way." Mateo squirmed closer to Lily, who smiled for the first time in days. "Remember," Ruth's voice softened, "love isn't divided when it's shared. It multiplies." After the final hymn, as the candles were being extinguished, Jonah gathered both children close. "You know what makes a real family?" he asked them. "What?" Mateo looked up with big eyes. "Love." Jonah hugged them both. "Just love. Nothing else matters." Lily's arms tightened around his waist. "Promise?" "I promise." He kissed the top of her head. "Love makes a family, and we have plenty of that." The autumn sunlight streamed through the open garage door as Jonah worked under the hood of Mrs. Peterson's old Buick. The familiar smell of motor oil and metal brought him comfort, a reminder that some things stayed simple even when life got complicated. The click of heels on concrete made him look up. Ava Cho stood in the doorway, briefcase in one hand and a manila envelope in the other. Her usual crisp suit looked slightly rumpled, suggesting a long night at the office. "You have a minute?" she asked, though her expression already told him this wasn't really a question. Jonah wiped his hands on a shop rag. "Let me close up." He turned to his assistant. "Mike, can you finish up Mrs. Peterson's car?" In his small office, Jonah cleared a stack of invoices from the chair across his desk. Ava sat down and placed the envelope between them. "The DNA results came back early," she said. "I wanted to deliver them in person." Jonah stared at the envelope, his heart pounding. "And?" "First, the clear news. You are definitively not Mateo's biological father. The tests show no genetic connection whatsoever." She pulled out several pages of technical data. "We also compared the clinic's archived samples to your DNA. There's no match there either." Relief flooded through him. "So Thomas." "Yes. We found a clear genetic link between the clinic samples and your brother's DNA from his medical records. He used your identification, but the genetic material was his." Jonah leaned back in his chair, letting out a long breath. "Have you told Maria?" "She was my first stop this morning." "She's relieved. But there's more." Ava pulled another document from her briefcase. "We followed the money trail from the tabloids that first published the fertility clinic story." "Guess where it led?" "Carter," Jonah said quietly. "Exactly. He bought a controlling interest in the parent company 6 months ago through a shell corporation. The timing suggests he was waiting for the right moment to leak those records. He knew about Thomas using my ID. Based on some emails we uncovered, he's known for years. Kept it as insurance." Ava's expression hardened. "We have enough to file a civil suit for defamation and malicious interference." The trust freeze would be lifted immediately. Jonah stood and walked to the small window overlooking the garage. Mike was explaining something to Mrs. Peterson, who nodded along kindly. Such a simple, honest interaction. "Do it," he said finally. "File the suit." The case moved quickly. Carter's lawyers, seeing the evidence mounting, pushed for a settlement within weeks. When the final agreement was signed, Jonah immediately donated the entire amount to the Riverbend Trust. But it was Maria who delivered the most powerful response. Her op-ed appeared in the Sunday edition of the local paper, then got picked up by national media. "Housekeeper is a job. Maid is the lie you heard. When you called me a maid," she wrote, "you thought you were describing my work. Instead, you revealed your own prejudice. I am a housekeeper, a professional who manages homes with skill and dignity. Maid is the word you chose to diminish me, to make my son's innocent love for a kind man seem suspicious. But your words cannot define us. My son knows the difference between a father and a friend, just as I know the difference between employment and exploitation. Mr. Reed has always treated us with respect, not because of his wealth, but because of his character. Perhaps that is what truly bothers his critics. That a billionaire would see a housekeeper as a human being worthy of basic dignity." The article sparked conversations across Riverbend about language, respect, and hidden bias. Letters to the editor poured in, many from other domestic workers sharing similar experiences. 2 weeks after the DNA results, the community center hosted a reopening ceremony for the Riverbend Trust. The main hall was packed as Pastor Ruth took the podium. "Today, we don't just restart a charitable fund," she announced. "We begin a new chapter in how we care for each other. And I can think of no better person to lead our family services division than someone who understands both professional excellence and human dignity, Maria Santos." Maria stepped forward, dressed in a sleek blue suit, her head held high. The applause was immediate and genuine. Mateo, sitting in the front row between Lily and Jonah, beamed with pride. "Thank you," Maria said when the clapping died down. "This role is more than a job to me. It's a chance to help other families find the support they need, with respect and understanding. Every person who walks through these doors will be treated with dignity, not because of their job title or bank account, but because that's what every human being deserves." She outlined her plans for expanded child care assistance, health care advocacy, and small business support. As she spoke, Jonah watched the audience lean forward, engaged and hopeful. This was what he'd wanted all along, not just to give money, but to empower people to help each other. When Maria finished, the room erupted in applause again. She made her way back to her seat, accepting handshakes and hugs. Mateo jumped up to hug her, and she held him close, whispering something that made him smile. The trust office would open officially the next day. But for now, watching Maria accept congratulations while Mateo proudly told everyone, "That's my mom," this was enough. This was truth winning over lies, dignity defeating prejudice, and a community choosing to grow stronger together. The October sun painted golden ripples across the river as families spread blankets on the grassy bank. Autumn leaves danced on the breeze, some landing in the calm water where they floated like tiny boats. Grace helped Maria arrange sandwiches and fruit on a red checkered tablecloth, while Jonah set up folding chairs nearby. Lily and Mateo crouched at the water's edge, carefully folding paper into boats. Each crisp white square held messages collected from the Letters to God box at church, prayers, hopes, and dreams from their neighbors. Lily showed Mateo how to make the corners sharp and precise. "Like this?" Mateo held up his slightly crooked creation. "Perfect," Lily beamed. "Want to write something on yours before we launch it?" Mateo nodded seriously, pulling a crayon from his pocket. His tongue stuck out in concentration as he carefully printed, "Thank you for my family." Other families began arriving with their own picnic baskets and blankets, spreading out along the riverbank. Pastor Ruth settled onto a bench beneath an old maple tree, her silver hair glowing in the dappled sunlight. Members of Grace's choir gathered near the water's edge, their sheet music rustling in the gentle breeze. "Ready to launch the boats?" Jonah called to the children. He carried a basket full of paper vessels, each one holding someone's written hopes. Lily and Mateo scrambled up, eager to begin. Other children joined them, forming a line along the bank. Grace stepped forward, raising her hands to direct the choir. "Let's sing them off," she said softly. The opening notes of River of Mercy rose into the clear autumn air as the first paper boat touched the water. Like a river flowing endless, mercy moving deep and wide, carrying our hearts to healing. Taking fear out with the tide, one by one, the paper boats were launched. Some spun in gentle eddies, while others caught the current, sailing straight and true. Mateo carefully set his boat on the water, watching with wide eyes as it joined the fleet of hopes and prayers. Maria wrapped an arm around her son's shoulders, her eyes glistening as she watched their message join the others. The choir's harmony swelled, voices weaving together like the river's currents. Second chances come like morning, breaking light across the way. Every heart finds home in loving, every soul finds space to pray. When the last boat had been launched, Jonah touched Grace's elbow gently. "Would you walk with me for a minute?" They strolled along the bank, away from the gathering but still within sight. The late afternoon sun turned everything to gold, the water, the leaves, even Grace's dark hair. Behind them, the choir continued singing softly. "Lily, Mateo, come here a second," Jonah called. The children bounded over, barely containing their excitement. They'd been practicing this moment all week. Jonah took Grace's hands in his. "When I pulled you from that car, I thought I was just doing what anyone would do. But God had bigger plans that day." His voice grew husky with emotion. "You've brought music back into my life, not just songs, but the melody of joy, of family, of love." Lily stepped forward, holding out a small velvet box. Inside nestled a simple diamond ring that caught the sunlight like captured stars. "Grace Alvarez," Jonah said, taking the ring as Mateo bounced on his toes, "will you marry me? Will you help me make this family complete?" Grace's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the hopeful faces around her. Jonah's steady love, Lily's shining excitement, Mateo's pure joy, and Maria watching from nearby with a warm smile. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes." As Jonah slipped the ring onto her finger, applause erupted from the gathered crowd. The choir burst into a joyful chorus of "River of Mercy" as people rushed forward to congratulate them. Lily and Mateo hugged each other, then threw their arms around Grace and Jonah. Maria joined them, completing their circle of love. More blankets appeared as the whole town seemed to join the impromptu celebration. Children played tag between the picnic blankets, while adults shared food and laughter. The paper boats had traveled downstream, carrying prayers toward the horizon, but their spirit of hope remained, tangible in the joy of the gathering. Pastor Ruth raised her paper cup in a toast to rivers of mercy, to second chances, and to love that makes family of us all. The late afternoon sun bathed everyone in golden light, the choir still singing softly, children playing tag between blankets, couples holding hands, elderly neighbors sharing stories with teenagers, families of all kinds sharing food and laughter. And at the heart of it all, Grace and Jonah sat surrounded by their children, their friends, their community, while the river flowed on, carrying hope toward tomorrow. If you enjoyed the story, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.